In this equation, we look to graph things that are written in what's called standard form, which is different than the form that we looked at in the last lesson called slope-intercept form, where the slope and the intercept were pretty visible because the y was by itself. Here, the x and the y are both on the same side, so it's called standard form. So the method that we used to graph our equations in the last lesson, we can't use here. Well, I mean, we could. If we wanted to, we could take this equation and get everything away from the y, but that's a lot of work when it's written in this form. There's a much quicker way to do it when it's written in standard form, so let me show you that. When you do an equation in standard form, the best thing to do is to look for the intercepts. So remember, the x-intercept has a 0 in its y value, and the y-intercept has a 0 in its x value. So if we plug in zeros, we can use this technique and graph the line using the two important points, which are the x and y intercepts. So I'm going to do two solving plans. First, I'm going to plug in 0 into the y value of this equation, and I'll see what I get for x, and then that will go in and become my x-intercept. Then I'm going to do it all over again with a 0 in the x value in this equation and see what I get for y, and then that will be my y-intercept value. So let's start off with the x-intercept, just because alphabetically it comes first. So I'm going to plug a 0 into the spot for y. So negative 2x plus 3 times 0 equals negative 6. Now the beauty of plugging in 0 is that this whole piece right here cancels out, and you just have negative 2x equals negative 6. And so obviously then that means that x equals 3. So my x-intercept is 3, 0. Now in order to graph a line, you need at least 2 points, so let's do that all over again, but now I'm going to plug in a 0 into the x value. So negative 2 times 0 plus 3y equals negative 6. And again, the beauty of using this method is that this term cancels out, and you just have 3y equals negative 6, and so y equals negative 2. So the y-intercept is 0, negative 2. So now I'll make a graph and plot my two important points. So notice that I have arrow tips and I'm labeling x, y. Now the first point that I'm going to plot is 3, 0. That's my x-intercept. I will also plot 0, negative 2. That was my y-intercept. And then take a straight edge or a ruler and connect them to make a line. Last thing you should always do is write the equation on the line somewhere. So this is... oh, whoops, I'm in the habit of writing y equals, and that's not true. So it is negative 2x plus 3y equals negative 6. All right, if you want to pause the video and try example B on your own, you're certainly welcome to do so. First, I need to remember, I always like to write down what I'm starting with. It gives me kind of a plan. So the x-intercept has a 0 in its y spot, and the y-intercept has a 0 in its x spot. So now let's plug in. So first I'll plug in 0 for the x. 0 plus 3y equals negative 3. That piece cancels out, and I get 3y equals negative 3, so the y value is negative 1. So the y value is negative 1. That means that the y-intercept point is at 0, negative 1. Now let's do the other one. I'm going to plug 0 in for y. X plus 3 times 0 equals negative 3. This piece cancels out, and I just simply get x equals negative 3. So the x value is negative 3. So now I'm going to plot my line, make a grid. Arrow tips, x, y. Use a straight edge, please. And I'm going to plot negative 3, 0. And 0, negative 1. And connect There's the line. And don't forget, x plus 3y equals -3 goes on the line. All right, last one together. You have $6 to spend on apples and bananas, and they give us an equation that represents the prices of the apples and the bananas. So we have to graph the equation and then also interpret the intercepts. So in order to graph the equation, I'll do my setup. The x-intercept looks like that, and the y-intercept looks like that, and so I'll get ready to plug in my values. So let's do 1.5 times 0 plus 0.6y equals 6. So that piece cancels, and I have 0.6y equals 6. When I divide by 0.6, that is 10. So my y value is 10. Now I do it all over again as an x value. 1.5 times x plus 0.6 times 0 equals 6. That piece cancels out. I have 1.5x equals 6. Divide by 1.5. X equals 4. So my x value is 4. Remember, for word problems, you always want to make sure that you put yourself in the quadrants you belong in. Since I'm talking about buying apples and bananas, it doesn't make sense for me to be in the negatives. So again, this is another example of when it makes sense to only be in the first quadrant. And since it's a word problem, not only will I put x and y, but it also put what it means. So this stands for pounds of apples, and this stands for pounds of bananas. So I will plot 4, 0 and 0, 10. Now remember, don't put arrow tips because it doesn't extend into the negatives. And last thing, 1.5x plus 0.6y equals 6. Make sure you label. And part B, last part, asks me to interpret the intercepts. So I know what my intercepts are. They're right here. But what does that mean? So what you do is you look at the labels for 4 and 0. So 4 represents pounds of apples and 0 represents pounds of bananas. So what that's representing is that I can buy 4 pounds of apples, and as long as I don't buy any bananas, for $6. So this is part B. For $6, you can buy 4 pounds of apples and 0 pounds of bananas. And then the other intercept is the kind of flip of that. For $6, you would buy 0 pounds of apples and 10 pounds of bananas. Now, you can write that differently. You don't have to be so robotic in the way that you write it. You can write it in a more advanced sentence, but that's pretty much what the intercept is saying. Again, this was the intercept for 0, and this was the intercept 0, 10. If you have any questions, write them down and ask me when you come to class.